right, welcome back, everybody. We're on to our final session for day one. The Fourth Asian Forum and Enterprise for Society now shines the spotlight on three essential letters. I've talked about ESG this morning, but today and this afternoon, we will talk about three letters that have become pretty controversial over the last couple of months since the change in the US presidency, and it is DEI. Doesn't that resonate? The previous session on climate emergency shown that some disruptions are driven by nature itself. Through nature-based solutions, enterprises are beginning to see resilience is not only about technology or profit, but about restoring balance with the ecosystems that sustain life and the industry alike. Now, a number of these disruptions are born from human systems, our structures of power, culture, and identity. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, represent a different kind of disruption. One that questions how organizations value people, fairness, and representation within their own ranks. DEI calls for fairness and understanding among people, and resilience extends beyond infrastructure and innovation. It begins with values and vision. So our final session asks the crucial question, what is next for DEI? Our moderator is a professor at the Asian Institute of Management and Executive Director of the Ramon V. Del Rosario Senior Center on Enterprise for Society, holding a PhD in management from the University of Texas, Arlington. Her research focuses on internationalization strategies, cross-border acquisitions, corporate governance, and workplace diversity. She has received multiple awards, including the 2019 Best Paper in International Corporate Governance at the Academy of Management, and has published extensively in peer-reviewed journals. So let's welcome Dr. Dynah Abigail T. Basuil.
Thank you, Kathy. Good afternoon, everybody. And I have to say, we did save the best for last. So, let me introduce you to our panelists. Our first panelist is the Chief Human Resources Officer of Cebu Pacific Air, the Philippines' leading airline, where he leads the people agenda for over 10,000 people with more than 24 years of HR leadership experience. Recognized as one of Southeast Asia's 100 most influential HR leaders, he champions a culture rooted in real connections, flexibility, and purpose-led leadership that resonates with the next generation. He is known for blending business strategy with human-centered culture, and his belief that culture is strategy, bringing energy, eloquence, and empathy to building people-first organizations. Please welcome Mr. Felix Dan S. Lopez. Our next panelist leads Page Executive in the Philippines, where she partners with organizations to recruit top executive and senior management talent. She has successfully placed more than 40 C-level leaders in the country, including returning Filipino executives, local talent, and expatriates. Her track record spans local conglomerates, private equity bank companies, and multinational corporations with deep experience across the consumer, healthcare, and telecommunications sector. Originally from the United Kingdom, Rhiannon joined Page in 2012 and has been with the firm for 14 years. She began her career in the UK business, later moving on to Indonesia before relocating to Manila in 2019 to launch the Philippine operations, which has since grown to a team of more than 60 employees. Our next panel is Ms. Rhiannon Guilford. Finally, we have the Principal Social Development Specialist, Gender and Development at the Asian Development Bank, ADB, where she serves as the lead focal for gender integration across ADB's private sector operations, focused on advancing women empowerment. She brings over 15 years of experience in inclusive private sector development across Asia and the Pacific and Africa. Let's please welcome Ms. Amanda Satterly. All right. And thank you so much for the three of you for actually being willing to talk about this topic that has divided organizations lately, right? And rather than discussing where you stand on this issue, I think I'd rather focus our conversations on our common values around this to engage in a more meaningful dialogue. Okay? And the first common value, of course, as we go through these letters, is diversity and how diversity benefits organizations. And Felix, at Cebu Pacific, you have won a lot of awards for your diversity programs, right? And look at how diverse your organization is, okay? I mean, you're, well, 22% of females, right? Which is above the global average. You've got, look at that, 88% millennials and Gen Z, right? So I'm certain that you did not implement these diversity programs to win awards. So why does Cebu Pacific invest in diversity, and what do you see are the benefits of being a diverse organization?
Sure. Good afternoon, everybody. I hope everyone's still awake. I know we're the last panel. Proud to represent Cebu Pacific. Been with the company for 6 years, but with the Gokongwei Group for 20 years already. So I moved around the Gokongwei Group. So speaking about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness, Dynah, for us, it's not really just a slogan or a nice to have. We consider DEIB as one of our business levers. Okay? So receiving the citations, the awards, are really just consequential. So way back 2019, we were very intentional. So as part of the management committee, we said, since we don't know much about DEIB during that time, we said, we need to partner with an institution. We partnered with the University of the Philippines. They helped us craft our guidelines, our policies, principles on DEIB. From there, we made sure that we educate the leaders first.
Okay.
So as Mancom, we were the first one to undergo all of the training sessions on DEIB. And then we cascade it down to the organization. From 2019 to now, this is where we are at. So what you get to see on the screen, because we have 32 nationalities, we have a lot of expat pilots, we have around 24 religious denominations, we have around 16 employee interest groups. Some of the resource groups would include for solo parents, for LGBTQIA+, for women innovation. Like what you see here, 22% pilots, but female pilots, 10% of our pilots are now female. Wow. And it's higher by 5% versus global benchmarks.
Right.
So given that this journey led us to where we are at the moment, to your question, why did we do it in the first place?
What does it bring,
right?
Cebu Pacific?
And like what I've said, it's a business lever for us. We have several reasons why we did it. First would be, and earlier I was able to catch the last panel and spoke about sustainability. First is really sustainability. We believe that the EIB is one of the materiality indices on sustainability. We also get measured on the IB as one of our indices on sustainability. Second would be stakeholder management. We believe that if an organization is diverse, then we're able to better manage our different stakeholders.
I see.
From passengers to employees to investors to communities. Third would be, since as an airline, we need to be very operationally efficient and safe.
True.
Having a diverse organization allows us to be able to look at all angles, ensuring that we avoid having blind spots because safety is primordial and we need to be efficient in our operations, right? The fourth one is decision making. If an organization is diverse, we believe that we have a more balanced way of making decisions in the organization. And the last one is really long-term resilience. We firmly believe that a diverse and inclusive organization would really be able to be agile and ride the waves of change, which is very important. So long-term resilience.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Amanda, in your work as a principal gender specialist supporting the private sector operations across Asia for the ADB, when I work with other international organizations, they're talked about conditionalities around the support that they provide to incentivize businesses to adopt diversity initiatives. Do you see a difference in the performance between those companies that actually integrate diversity into their core businesses as opposed to just approaching diversity simply for compliance purposes?
Yes, thank you. Agreed. We do work with our clients, so we lend to private sector organizations across about 40 countries in Asia and the Pacific. And for every transaction, every deal, every project, we work with the client to understand where they are now and to see what they could do more of in relation to inclusion and diversity. But that's really a conversation around where the value lies. We work with the client to understand what is the business case, what is the untapped potential that they could access. Maybe it's customers that they currently haven't considered as a niche market. Maybe it's decision making. Maybe they could expand
Like Felix said.
their management decision-making structures. So we work together to sort of identify where the gaps are. So as you were presenting Cebu Pacific, I was benchmarking it.
Yes.
And they are above the industry average. For example, pilots for women are generally 7% in the Asia-Pacific region. So we benchmark against how the industry peers are doing, because corporates don't like to be behind. They like to be the leaders. So if we're able to explain to them where they sit relative to their peers and what their peers are doing, we see the buy-in, and it's their choice. So when it comes to inclusion and things like that, we don't mandate anything. We have, of course, safeguarding provisions, but everything that our clients commit to in relation to inclusion is a choice that they make because they believe in it, and it's something that they're happy to invest in.
Sure. And do they end up performing better after they're given that choice?
We believe so. I mean, of course, there's no counterfactual, right? So we can't say what would happen if they didn't do those inclusion initiatives. But what we see and what they tell us is that it does open their eyes, and they do see elements that they hadn't seen before, and that's what they really appreciate when they partner with Asian Development Bank. We bring a perspective that perhaps other lenders or other partners, stakeholders don't bring, and they appreciate that perspective. And but that's what they tell us. I mean,
Yes.
maybe they say something else after a drink.
Sure. Thank you for that, Amanda. And as a talent acquisition leader, you actually have visibility across multiple organizations. Did organizations that were committed to having diverse leadership become less or more committed during the times of disruption or uncertainty, which is the topic of our forum the entire 2 days?
Thank you for that. So I wouldn't say it's, you could say generally speaking, it's more or less. What we've seen in the last 5 years is a lot more commitment from partner companies to invest in DE&I. So I think that's a positive thing. Yes. Even if you just take basics like the pandemic, for example, where that's opened up a huge talent pool that was not previously available. So there would be, for example, female C-level leaders who have built up maybe over 10, 15 years, a certain amount of credibility in their organization. So prior to the pandemic, they wouldn't leave because they have managed to earn trust and flexibility. Whereas now it's a given. So all of a sudden, there's a pool of talent that would previously not consider looking out, who we can now represent, and they're more willing to take on C-level roles. We're also just seeing more requests for projects. So we've recently done a project in the US for a company who wanted to hire more neurodiverse talent for technology roles.
Nice.
So we hired 7 people for that, and 87 people for a project in Brazil where a manufacturing company wanted to hire more people with disabilities. So, and just recently here, there was a large FMCG company that were requesting how can we do more to open the pool of talents.
That's very heartening to hear, right? Because some of the conversation that we're hearing around DEI is backtracking from some of those commitments. So it's very encouraging to hear about those organizations that are somehow doubling down on DEI. But let me go ahead to the next value, and probably the most controversial, around equity or fairness and how everyone can be treated fairly. I mean, everyone wants that, right? So let's go ahead and ask our audience. I've got a question here on my, you scan the QR code, and the question is, agree or disagree with this statement? An individual's identity, gender, age, ethnicity, status, what have you, should not be used to help or harm them in their life's endeavors. And this is a fairness question. So we're seeing how people are somehow leaning on the agree. And while we are trying to get more and more people to answer it, let's go with Amanda. What do you think, or how do you feel about this statement? Agree or disagree?
Am I allowed to be controversial?
Please.
So I actually disagree with this statement. And the reason I disagree is that some of us have experienced systemic disadvantage, and sometimes we need, the way that I think about it is that it's like a starting line and it's a 100-meter race. And some of us just happen to start 20 meters back than everyone else. And so sometimes you need to give the person the chance to at least be at the starting line, so we all have an equal chance when the gun goes and we can all run. And for example, examples that I always think of is like in some cultures, you know, you don't have this issue here in the Philippines, I don't think, maybe in some cultures, but women are not allowed to own land. They're not allowed to inherit land. It's not passed down. And so if you don't own land, you can't get a loan. And if you can't get a loan, you can't start a business. So, you know, we spend time in those cultures, in those societies, working to find ways to allow women to still borrow, even if they can't inherit land because of the cultural norms. So that's an example where we're just trying to level the playing field and allow her to also be able to borrow money. Another one for me is personal safety. As a woman, we're always worried about our personal safety on a level that men don't have to worry about it, and it inhibits our ability. Some women won't go to work because they can't actually find a safe way to get to and from work, which sometimes men don't have that same challenge. So I do think that sometimes we need to think about, because of the status, ethnicity, gender, a person might need a different set of circumstances to give them an equal chance to be able to then move forward, to get a job, to start a business.
Thank you. Rhea, agree?
You're convincing them.
I know, it's somehow moving that needle a little bit, right?
Yeah, without staying on the fence, I think that what I really believe in is trying to broaden the pool as much as possible. So not taking opportunities away from, let's say, male candidates to give them to female candidates, but
so equity is not about that. Equity is not about taking the opportunity away from one group to give to the other.
Mm-hmm. But more, how do we broaden the pool? So, for example, one company might say, I need to hire a CFO. Michael Page, can you find me a CFO? And it should be a female, right? Whereas another company might have a different approach where they'll say, okay, your target is 40% of the long list has to be female candidates. So what do I have to do? We have to work harder. So you have to make sure that there's more rigor in the search, not to take men out of those opportunities, but actually to find people that wouldn't necessarily be applying to the roles or whatever.
Right, right. So you're actually doing more steps to diversify the pool so that you can get the best talent possible and not just somehow going to the same pool, because then you see, okay, we're doing the same things and this is how we ended up with, similar backgrounds, right? Similar gender, perhaps, or age.
Yeah, and even things like unpaid work. So I think it's more than 75% of unpaid work is done by females. So let's assume it's a job opportunity. If the females in that industry or function are spending so much time on unpaid work, where do they find the time to be applying to opportunities or putting themselves forward? So we have to be mindful of this and do more to level that playing field.
Right. And Felix, agree or disagree?
I agree more with Shan here. But first, let us operationalize. Earlier we spoke about diversity, right? In Cebu Pacific, when we speak of diversity, the question really is, who are inside the room, right? So,
Yes.
who are inside the room? So that's diversity. I think this question is more applicable on the principle of equity. And I think the bigger question on equity is, how do we actually build the room? Right?
Yes.
So in Cebu Pacific, that is a reverberating question. How are we building the room? So earlier, we showed where we are at in our journey already from 2019, how diverse we are. But we were also very cognizant that we need to create equal opportunities. We need to break barriers for us to be able to shape what type of room we want to have in our organization. So if the question in diversity is, okay, we broke the glass ceiling. We hired the first trans woman cabin crew in the Philippines in 2019. We're doing good with regard to our ratio on female pilots. We're even very good as well with regard to women in managerial roles. Currently, it's 50-50. So we're very good on that. But significantly, we also have to look into our systems, our processes. How do we actually build that platform to create equal opportunities? So some of the things that we've recently done, for example, for HMO and also for our travel benefit, if before HMO and travel benefit would really be for traditional dependents of our employees, we've opened it up recently to same-sex and common law partners. So that is basically equity, right? Trying to build what room you want to have in the organization. Similarly, in our learning and development platform, which we call Cebu Pacific University or SEB University, if before we only had 3 schools, School of Leadership, School of Performance, and School of Values. Recently, we've expanded the school and we've dedicated a school for DEIP. So there's already a school for diversity, equity, inclusion, and belongingness. So there's continuous education to the whole company on what DEIB is for Cebu Pacific as a business leader and what should they be doing as an employee of Cebu Pacific.
Yes, I mean, I like hearing about designing systems and processes so that people from all walks of life can actually benefit or have that opportunity to become part of the organization. And I think that's what Amanda was talking about too, about, when it comes to being able to level the playing field, right? Getting them to start at the same point. And so I think for the most part, we do agree with the statement, as long as it's the ideal world, right? That everybody starts from the same level at the same point, but in cases where it does not, right, that's where the removing barriers that you mentioned, Felix, becomes really, really important. And so you talked about the inclusion, and diversity is about opening the doors, letting different people come in, but a diverse organization is not automatically an inclusive organization, right? I mean, you see this, and this is like the dots are the people, and there are different people, which is diversity, but this is not inclusion, right? Because the different people are still somehow secluded. And what prevents organizations from becoming inclusive? And the inclusive that we're talking about would be really taking out those barriers that Felix mentioned earlier. Reed, do you want to take that question in terms of what are the barriers?
Yeah, I'd say number one would be a lack of role models. So I think it's very, very important in terms of inclusivity for people to have that sense of belonging, and it's difficult to have that if you don't see anyone above you or in senior roles who are relatable. So I think role models is really important. And I think someone mentioned it earlier, maybe even in the previous session, but on training for leaders. So it seems like maybe a small thing, but I think it's very important that people understand how their language lands on employees coming through the business. Leaders need to understand what inclusive behavior looks like. And it's also dependent on function. Amanda's talking about, for example, being safe in the environment, having so we have to create that safe space. So that could be being able to speak, to speak up if you are in discomfort or something isn't sitting right, but also just what's the nature of your role? Is there a sense of safety, of belonging? Are employees in awkward situations because they're in a specific group, and we have to be really mindful about that and talk about that and make sure that there is a platform for people to speak up, even if it's not directly to their immediate leader.
Sure, and you shared this study with us where the level of inclusivity in the office, right, for the Asia Pacific talent trends, and we see that there are these factors, right? You mentioned, not having diverse senior leadership, and you cannot be authentic at work, right? I mean, this hasn't moved between 2024 and 2025. And I think it even increased between 2024 and 2025.
Yeah, and it's a huge percentage. If you think about it in terms of the amount of people who are saying that they cannot be authentic at work. So even with our Philippines engagement survey, it was higher than this, but until that...
Surprising?
Sorry?
Is that surprising? Expected?
No, I don't think it's surprising. A lot of the engagement in general for the Philippines results is a lot higher than the rest of APAC. General engagement levels are higher, and this is across different industries. But I think it's a positive thing, but at the same time, we're not celebrating 90% for this. This should be 100%, so until people feel like they can be themselves, then we haven't yet created the right environment.
And Amanda, in your conversations with the organizations that ADB supports, are there similar trends that you see when it comes to creating that inclusive culture?
So what I would say is that one of the things that we focus on is when trying to help organizations become more inclusive. For example, it's not unusual for me to work with some clients. Like I said, I work across many countries. So outside of the Philippines, where an entire workshop may be only men, like hundreds and hundreds of people. And what we suggest is that they don't try to hire one woman or
The
two
token.
women, you know.
The
but
token woman,
Say
right?
again?
The token woman.
Yes, because also that woman won't feel like she belongs. Yes. So what we do is we suggest that they pilot, say, hiring a team of 10 or getting 10 interns or 5 interns, because unless that woman feels some sense of belonging, I mean, I often just say to them, do you even have a female toilet here? You know, like it's amazing how to shift the culture. It takes more than just hiring people. You know, you need to create an environment. I went to a geothermal power plant last week in Indonesia. Was it only last week? And it was fantastic. They had all these female apprentices and all these female interns, and they were so excited and passionate, but you could see it's because they had a cohort that they really felt like they connected to. Some of them were living on site, and they told me they felt safe because they were not alone. So that's what I would say, is that if we're looking to shift culture, to think about it holistically and not tokenistically, like you were saying, that
Yes.
people really, you know, women or whoever it is you're trying to bring in, people with disabilities, people of different ethnicities, you really need to create that sort of, it needs to be more than the odd one or two. They sometimes say it needs to be as much as a third, which is a lot. But what I'm saying is, yeah, don't hire a couple and say, oh yeah, we did hire a woman and she didn't stay. It's
Right,
trickier than
right. And when you have this inclusive culture, Felix, and when we want to be able to demonstrate exactly what it does to an organization, I noticed that you have mentioned in terms of attrition, right? How for Cebu Pacific, because you have diverse employees, and they feel like they belong, people tend to actually stay in the organization.
Of course, the DEI is just one of the levers
Right.
on why people stay in a company, right?
Absolutely.
This is one of the major factors. So we are at single-digit attrition, has always been a single-digit 7% before. We're now at 5%. But years
5.2,
back,
yeah.
it was double digits. Okay, our employee net promoter score has always been high and it's always been positive. So these are some of our citations and accolades. But let me just dovetail to what both of them said.
Yes.
And I think it's very important that we complete the equation. Because in our minds, as leaders in Cebu Pacific, so one thing is to be diverse. And that is like what I've said, who are inside the room, right? The second one is equity. And how do we build the room where the diverse people will be housed? And your question now is on inclusion. And for us in Cebu Pacific, the question on inclusion is, and both of them said it, who has a voice inside the room? So it's that, it doesn't stop to whether or not you have a diverse organization, but are those people inside the room, are they able to speak up? Do they really have a voice? Are they really genuinely represented? If we take it further, which is what you've said earlier about belongingness, the bigger question of belongingness, and I used the same analogy of the room, right? So who has a voice in the room is inclusion. For belongingness, are the people inside the room happy? Can they actually bring their authentic selves to work
Right. Can they
while
be
inside
themselves?
that room?
Right.
So that is always what's reverberating in our minds. It's just always, it's a daily challenge, right? And therefore the importance, and somebody said culture, the importance of psychological safety in any organization. In Cebu Pacific, at Mancom, we would always say, we have to model how to respectfully throw bricks. We respectfully throw bricks at each other's ideas. There was a time where we even had actual bricks made out of
no.
styrofoam. Just figurative, right? So how do you respectfully throw bricks at each other's ideas? And we want that to be echoed down the organization. We want people to be able to speak up so that they have that genuine sense of inclusion and belongingness.
Right. And who or what is responsible for creating that inclusive culture? Lee?
I think it starts at the top.
Can't start at the bottom.
Well, everyone can be responsible and part of it. And I think I just need to clarify on the previous point as well. So the Philippines, in terms of the inclusivity, was the highest score in a positive way
Okay.
for bringing their authentic self. So that's why.
That's good to hear.
Yes. But no, everyone is responsible. You know, every business leader should make it one of their top priorities to make sure that, you know, if you ultimately want to retain top talent and talent in general within the organization, you're not going to be able to do that if people are sitting in the organization in fear of raising their thoughts or bringing things up. So it's not easy. You know, I think people, there is sometimes a fear of raising things in case of, you know, is this going to impact my promotion if I bring X, Y, Z up? So we have to make sure that safe space is there. You know, even the internal platforms that are often there, whether it's, so they'll be mental well-being related, but typically less than 1% of employees use the company platform. So it's just a case of actually getting people to use
So
these.
what's the point of having it if nobody's using it?
And having some kind of outlet, because it's not always going to be the direct manager, and I think that's why we need to make sure there's other ways.
So the tone at the top is very, very important. And I think Felix also mentioned that, you know, it started with your ManCom, right? That commitment to becoming a diverse organization, right? So you have those DEIB initiatives in a school, absolutely. And Amanda, from a macro development perspective, why must we invest in inclusion?
It makes money. So if you look at some of these statistics here, for example, McKinsey has done a study, but they say that, you know, if we did a better job of inclusion, we would add 4.5 trillion to annual GDP.
I heard that, yes.
And it's a figure that's quoted a lot, but basically, I heard it this morning during the keynote. But it's true. I mean, if we're not fully leveraging all the talent in a country, of course we're not going to achieve as much as we could if everyone was able to contribute fully. So we see it at the macro level, but we see it at the organizational level. So, for example, we invest in private equity companies who in turn invest in companies. And, you know, we know that women founders get less than 1% of, you know, venture capital, which is crazy. And yet we know that those same women founders go on to have better returns on average than the market. So there's money left on the table. It actually really makes sense. Women control $20 trillion in consumer spending. Again, on this same visit last week in Indonesia, we were talking to a company that produced electric bikes, motorbikes, and they were talking about their marketing strategy. And I said, to what extent are you talking to women? Because actually men don't get to make these decisions on their own, even though they're the one that might own the bike and go in to buy the bike. I guarantee that the wife is the one who needs to be convinced. And are you speaking to her? And the men in the room always laugh when I say these kinds of things, because they all go, actually, it's true. Yeah, my wife decides everything. And yet, these are the same marketing executives who are not talking to women, which I always find funny. So we know that women are really important consumers, and yet so often they don't talk to us. I think for me, what's most staggering is that even when the products are for women, they don't talk to us.
Oh, no.
Oh,
no.
You know, it's amazing, but it's true. I mean, we all know of all the, you know, I was just rereading it as I was waiting to come on, which is the number of even contraceptive devices that were tested on men and not women. Because they said that the hormone cycle interferes with their results on their, you know, which was the whole point, I would have thought. But it even affects us today. So vehicles, when they're doing the safety testing, they test them only using male dummies. And so women are more often injured in car accidents than men because they're not designed for our bodies. So these sorts of things perpetuate. And it's costing us as society, it's costing us in terms of dollars. And that's what I said. When we talk to clients and we tell them what they're leaving on the table, that they could be making more money, and would they like us to do a gender assessment to understand how they could unlock some of that value, they generally say, yes, please, we'd love to know how to sell more electric motorbikes if you can tell us how to do that.
Sure. And I like how you put it, where you're leaving value or money on the table. It's not, look, we're giving more value to this side and leaving the other side less off, right? I mean, it's actually making that pie bigger so that more will actually benefit.
Exactly.
Right? So we've got an online question right here. For many employees with disabilities, disclosure can be risky. They worry it might change how they're perceived or treated. And from your experience, what can companies do to make self-declaration safe and stigma-free? What are the best practices that you have seen that help build a truly inclusive culture? Who wants to take this question?
Can do. So certain things can make a big difference, which is simply having platforms where people from that organization celebrate their differences. And we've learned a lot about colleagues or people in different teams across our company globally from this, but it makes a big difference. You feel like it's completely safe, and the company's putting its best foot forward to make that environment a safe place for people to work. And I think otherwise, from a company standpoint, you just have to make sure that everyone does have practically what they need, whether it's standing desks, depending on what it is, but they have to see that you're investing in people and accommodating people who may have a disability. So many different practical things can make a difference.
And I feel for the person who actually put this question out, because I was surprised during COVID when everybody was getting sick. There were actually people who said, I cannot declare that I have had COVID. And I'm like, but everybody's got it. So why is that stigmatized, and why is it so difficult for you to say, look, I got COVID, right? Felix, any ideas?
So earlier we've mentioned about the need for education, and that's why we have formal modules under SEB University, under the School of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion, Belongingness, particularly on people with disability. So we really devote time and effort to come up with content, and we don't own the wealth of knowledge. We're very humble in that aspect. That's why we partner with a lot of groups. So we partnered with specifically for disability with PBDN. For the other groups, we're partners with PFIP, PBCW. We're even partners with Autism Society of the Philippines, Down Syndrome Association of the Philippines, and so much more. Because there should be an admission that you don't have the wealth of knowledge and you need help as an organization, right? So that we will be better educated. So they help us with all of these educational materials that we do in our organization. Another aspect that I'd like to share is when employees get to see that you actually walk the talk, then it's easier for them to be authentic and not to fret doing self-declaration that I have a disability. So a concrete example that we did in Cebu Pacific, and we've been partners with the Vanguard Academy for 2.5 years already. So we've opened the company for internships for neurodiverse students. Okay, so diverse, so meaning these are students within the autism spectrum. So we guided the different departments on how we should be approaching interns who are neurodiverse.
Sure.
So if you are an employee who has a disability and you know that your company is doing this extra mile, doing the effort to really educate the organization. Second is there are really concrete initiatives that they're doing for people with disability. And it doesn't only stop with employees. Our thinking is we should reflect this to passengers. That's why we did policies on companion pets with the aero bridge so that people with disability could easier climb the aircraft. So all of these things. So I think the word is being intentional.
Yes.
So that at least you'll come up with programs, policies that would have an impact to both employees and the passengers.
Right. And in ADB, Amanda, are there like programs, practices that actually make it easy for you to?
I just want to reiterate the comment. I sat in a workshop recently with people with disabilities, and it was one of the most fantastic sessions I'd ever had. And one of the things they explained is nothing about us without us. So, and I think this was really insightful what you said, which is if we're trying to figure out how to make our, organizations more inclusive, then we need to speak to the people whom we're trying to and
Be inclusive too.
yeah, exactly. And honestly, and just going back to what I said earlier, if we make workplaces and products and our businesses more inclusive, everyone benefits. A lot of what we currently use now are things that were initially developed for people with disabilities. So text, when you're watching a YouTube video, even texting was originally for people with hearing impairments. Most of the functionality on our smartphones. My son loves using all the different functionality. He said, look, I can even move it now without even have to touching my iPhone. I just use the point. All these things are designed for people with disabilities, but we all benefit when the world is more inclusive for all of us. So that would be my only comment.
That's a great example. We've got a question. I see a hand right there. Please state your name and
Okay, so hello,
question.
good afternoon to all. I'm Matthew from the University of Asia and the Pacific, UANP. And my question is, what are the efforts at extending DEI to indigenous communities around the world, but most especially in the Philippines as well? Maybe Mr. Lopez can give some thoughts on extending DEI to indigenous communities, but not just in the matter of hiring, but also in the context of business strategy, especially with the increasing business incursions into ancestral land in the Philippines through mining or property development. So how do we reconcile the pursuit for profit and economic growth to differing perceptions of development and success across different cultures? Thank you so much.
Thank you for that question, Matthew.
It's a very good question. So,
Have you considered it?
of course, some of the discussions are confidential, but what I can assure you is these are things that we are discussing. Every time we look into where we fly, right, one of the aspects that we have to deep dive into would be how do we actually help the community that we fly to? Okay, so the thinking now in Cebu Pacific would be the communities where we fly to. The challenge, and basically the part and parcel of your question is, how about communities that we might not be flying to? How do we further support them, right? At this point in time, we are at the brainstorming stage because in our minds, how do we, there are discussions whether we will come up with a foundation. So these are things that are on the brainstorming stage. And if you are a foundation, then definitely you have all aspects, you consider all aspects on how you can help communities. And by communities, could be indigenous, could be the impoverished, all of these things. Like what I've said, at this point in time, we are very intentional in helping communities where we fly to. The challenge is how do we further help the communities even though we don't fly to that communities.
Right. And I hope that answered your question. I think the way that you would do it is the same way that you've been doing it with those other groups that you wanted to get included, which is with much respect and really this dialogues of how can we do this with you rather than just practically, ramming it down their throat, right? Which is not...
Like what I've said, we have to first appreciate a deep dive
Right.
and know what we need to know, right, before we do something.
Absolutely.
And this is the same due diligence that we do to any destination that we fly to.
Sure. And this is a very interesting question that we got online. Do you believe lack of authenticity is driven due to fear of speaking or lack of psychological safety? Should mental health be part of the DEI agenda? Who wants to take this first? Mental health.
The first sentence, for us, because when you talk of psychological safety, one of the most critical ingredient there is the ability to speak up without fear of repercussion.
Right.
So I don't think it's one or the other, but it's basically the same thing for us, right? So we want our employees to be able to show their authentic selves to work, and therefore, like what we've said, we are improving the culture to focus more on psychological safety. And one of the critical factors that we measure would be whether or not our people are not afraid to speak up, right? So that's the first question. Should mental health be part of the DEI agenda? It is part of our DIB agenda. In fact, we have several avenues and mechanisms to support pilots, cabin crew, our ground staff with mental health. So right now we're partners with MindCare for free counseling, mental health sessions, and even extended it to their dependents. We are taking it to the next level, so we're in talks with another provider on how to further embed mental health assistance to both our employees and our dependents. So that second, yes, mental health is part of our DIB agenda.
I mean, is there another reason why you would actually be afraid of speaking, right? I mean, because that's also part of the question. Do you believe lack of authenticity is driven due to the fear of speaking, right? And you said that's basically one
For
and
us,
the same,
yeah.
right? I think it's really, you could speak out, but it's what comes after when you speak out, right? And that's where the psychological safety comes in, that you can speak out and not have any consequences because you spoke or because you wore something that people don't expect you to be wearing, right? A lot of these behaviors. So it's usually the after effect, isn't it?
Yes, I do agree. It's very well connected, if not the same. And this is where, again, the coaching for line managers, business leaders
Yes.
is really important, because the way that they react is going to determine, what comes next, essentially. So how are those people? Are they even trained in this, or is it purely skills, functional training? And then someone makes a mistake, and lo and behold, we don't hear much from them again. So,
Yes.
yeah, I think it's very, very important to create that environment, to echo what Felix has said.
And should mental health be part of our DEI agenda? Do you talk about mental health?
I think it goes beyond the DEI agenda. I think we all have a better appreciation for mental health after COVID. I think that, I don't know about
Yes.
you, but I know at Asian Development Bank, it became much more of a focus, and people really understood how important mental health was, and making sure that employees had access to services. So I think it goes beyond DEI. I think it's a good component, but I think it just is basic HR now, I think, is how
The well-being of your employees,
people's well-being
absolutely.
is key. I just want to go back to the Indigenous people point.
Sure.
This is something I'm particularly proud of at Asian Development Bank. We take these kinds of, what we call our safeguards, or how we interact with the communities where our projects impact, extremely seriously. We have Indigenous people experts on staff, and every single project is assessed for impact on Indigenous people, and then if they are impacted, and this is what I think is fantastic, our safeguards team does the most amazing livelihood programs where they really try to not just, if people are losing access to land or to their livelihoods, they really try to make them better off. And I've been constantly impressed by the way that they really just take that opportunity to really, try to change people's livelihoods. So yes, ADB takes Indigenous people and our impact on them very, very seriously.
So rather than taking it as a risk, really looking at it as an
Like
opportunity,
an opportunity. Yeah.
to improve their lives.
Yeah, absolutely.
Before we take one more online question, are there questions on the floor? Yes.
Okay, so hi,
Hi.
my name is Trisha. I'm from De La Salle University, Manila. And so my question is kind of related to the earlier talks as well. So the common theme is really digitalization and really weaving automation into human made decisions initially. And in the perspective of like recruitment and hiring, like we know that these digitalization processes are being weaved into that already. So for example, like resumes are being sorted by algorithms and stuff. And it has also been mentioned earlier that there are concerns with like biases when we feed technologies into, and when we use technologies into making decisions like that. So my question is, how do you like ensure that DEI is still very much involved into the whole digitalization process in order to make sure that the Philippine enterprises are future-proof for DEI in the age of AI?
Wow, DEI in the age of AI. Thank you for that question.
I believe it's more of a positive. The introduction of AI should, in turn, have positive implications on DEI. I know some of the top global companies for DEI. Some of the things that they do is they're using AI tools to remove biases from processes for blind screening. So those kind of things, there needs to be checks and balances, of course, like with any hiring process, but it should be more of an enabler in a positive sense than having one interviewer or two interviewers from the same demographic, reading the resume.
Sure. And, the bias that you put in, obviously, if you have that on the AI, it actually gets so magnified, right? So the thing is, we must find a way to go remove that into the AI, right?
So,
to be able
I'll
to be
to
fair.
what she said. So, in Cebu Pacific, yes, so you leverage heavily on AI with regard to the whole talent sourcing and acquisition function.
Does that mean you also use AI for
because we know that
interviews?
there are definitely functions in talent acquisition that can be automated, and we are now automating, like resume screening, scheduling people, and a lot more.
Interviews?
Right? Coming up with
No interviews?
interview summaries, etc. Right? But there are aspects of talent acquisition that you really cannot automate. So AI will just augment it. So what are those? For example, interviews.
No AI.
No AI, right?
Apparently
At the
there
end of
are
the day,
now
nobody
AIs.
from Cebu Pacific will be hired if they didn't undergo an interview with the recruiter or with the hiring managers. And definitely, interviews will be able to eliminate your prejudices and biases. So we're very conscious on what tasks can really be automated by AI and what tasks can just be augmented. And therefore, the humanness still is retained. So there. And when the human is still retained, then definitely that removes your biases and prejudices.
Sure.
Yeah, I agree. This is great, but I also hear the other part, the shadow part of this, which is if the AI tools are themselves biased. And I
Right.
think this is what we need to be very aware of. For example, Siri and all of those voices, originally they came out as female voices. And it was, people yelling instructions at a woman, at a female voice without saying please and thank you. It does something to the psychology, I think. So, now you can have male voices and things like that, but there is something deeply psychological around AI, how it's being created, how we're using it, and how it evolves and is influencing us as much as we're influencing AI. And I think that the way that we tackle it is by constantly challenging it and constantly checking it and never taking it for granted. Because I agree, it's so powerful
And so easy.
So it can help so much. But also, we need to totally be aware all the time that it could take a a quick turn.
Absolutely. Let's go to this online question that we have here. In countries like Germany and France, private companies are legally required to meet specific quotas for PWD employment. In the Philippines, we are currently encouraged rather than mandated. Do you think our country and our corporate sector are ready to adopt a similar quota system?
I'm happy to go first on this one.
Sure.
I generally find when I speak to corporates, because we talk about people with disabilities inclusion as well when we're creating what we call action plans with them. And most corporates aren't against the idea. Like, they're not inherently bad people. You know, people are like, oh, no. Why don't companies do more? They just don't know how, and they just are looking for that little bit of support. So I was talking to a couple of companies recently, and I said, would you be interested? And they said, yes, sure, but how? I said, we have an expert on staff, a consultant, who can work with you, tell you what the guidelines are, find you organizations in your country that place people with disabilities. All you have to do is, you know, tell us what roles you have available. They match them for you. They then come and assess the workplace and see what accommodations need to happen. And they were like, great, you know. So it's, and what I find, I call it the investment cost, because the first time you do something, it's hard. You don't know who to ask, you don't know where to go. It's, you know, it's sort of, there's the hump, the investment hump. But once they've hired, the example I love the most is in Mongolia, where I have the best job. So I was in Mongolia.
You go everywhere.
At Kentucky Fried Chicken. This is a true story. So one of our investments was with a company, and of its many companies, it had Kentucky Fried Chicken. And the CEO, I love the fact that it's always these leaders. So even when we're talking about diversity and inclusion, we always make sure it's with the CEO, or because it's that top down. So we're chatting to the CEO, and he was explaining to us that there was this one young man about 10 years ago now, but he kept writing this letter after letter, saying the only thing I've ever wanted to do was work at KFC. It is my dream job. And this young man was deaf. And he said, I'm deaf, but I'll do anything. I'll clean tables, I'll mop the floor, you know, you tell me whatever you want. And he kept putting this letter aside, you know, each letter. And then his mother came in and said, look, you know, this is my son's dream, is to work for KFC. So in the end, he took him on. He said, okay, you know, he can come and he can be
gave in.
A busboy. Anyway, he was so good and so committed and such a good employee. I'm not exaggerating. They have about 30 people with hearing impairments now working at KFC in Mongolia. Like, and the entire, you know, they have deaf people working everywhere, because once he hired the first one, right, and he got over the hump of it, then that deaf person was able to support the others, and now they have a whole community of deaf workers, and they support each other, and they're fantastic employees. But it's that initial hump where you keep going, no, it's too hard. But once he actually hired, we've made videos about him and the way that he, you know, so it's possible, but that's why I'm all about supporting corporates getting over the hump.
Right. And, you know, these employees where normally they were not given the chance to actually become part of that organization are just so thankful to be given that chance that they end up becoming very hard workers, like Amanda said, and very committed to the organization. And which organization doesn't want such employees? Felix, were you about to add something?
Yeah. First, it's one step at a time. We don't want to talk about quotas yet, because you also don't want it to appear like it's tokenism. Like, okay, so we want to be diverse. We have people with disability in our organization. So for us, baby steps. So what have we been doing recently on this particular aspect? We identified which functions can we accommodate more, or can we hire people with disability. We partnered recently with LaSalle for us to have a cohort of deaf and mute possible employees for us to for them to help on our customer care department. We transitioned our customer care from voice to live chats. So for sure, deaf and mute people can actually help on that particular function. So for us, it's more than really
A number.
a quota, for as long as, again, I go back now, for as long as you're deliberate and intentional and you know that you have a roadmap, baby steps, then perhaps we'll go there. But for us, for now, what's important, I go back to equity. How do we actually build that room so we are creating equal opportunities for everybody, regardless?
Okay, and I think that's a good segue to this question where what does equity really look like in practice, especially in promotions, leadership pipelines, or access to opportunities? What does equity really mean? What does it mean to be fair to everybody?
This comes up a lot, and I think there's certain functions where it's more prevalent than others. Promotions is a very good example of, for example, let's say the sales function, and you've got people at the same level in an organization, and one is able to go out with clients every night, wine and dine, whatever, and someone else is in a different situation. They can't do the same.
Yes.
So there has to be a way of finding equity in that in terms of how those people are evaluated in terms of their performance so that they still have the same potential internally based on their capability rather than circumstances. So, and I would say that's where I see the most inequity in terms of, I suppose, generally speaking. So I think these things are really, really important. And then in terms of succession planning as well, along the same lines, but companies that I would say have done it really well, move people around in the organization between functions or roles very often so that they can create a career path to the top regardless of the personal circumstances of those people.
So providing different paths to leadership is actually good because then, sometimes they may not be able to go and travel all the time, because they would have children, so they can have another role that will provide some, like maybe the organization being able to measure their competency similarly in leadership.
Yeah, precisely.
Good. And you know what? When I was working with ILO, there were 2 words on equity and promotions that I kept hearing a lot, and it's management discretion, right? I mean, there's 2 words where people were like, 2 people, they're the same, there's only one spot, how do you choose? And they say, Dynah, that's an easy answer, management discretion, right? And
That's
you
where the bias
cringed.
comes in. Well, that's where the bias comes in, I think. That's where it's really difficult. And we're all human. And how do we try to set the bias aside and really try to evaluate? That's the challenge, I think. We're all human.
Again, I go back. Equity is how do you build a room, right? So in Cebu Pacific, we make sure that when you talk of promotions or succession planning, we are very clear and we communicate it to the organization. So the criteria are the following. Look at skills, look at performance. For the past 3 years, look at potential. We don't even talk about anymore whether you're a woman or you're a mother with 4 kids versus a male guy. We don't anymore look into that. I think the criteria should be set and people know it, you communicate it, so that at least everyone knows, okay, that person was chosen because they looked at specific solid parameters. That was skills, that was performance over time, that was potential.
Right.
Explicit criteria and transparent.
Transparency, process that everybody knows, and now they know, oh, okay, so that's how you get promoted, right? So it becomes clear to everybody, and there's really fairness in that. Wonderful.
I think the party's already started over here.
I know, on the other side, right? And so I guess we must close on that with the music on the next room, on this ongoing dialogue with DEI initiatives. I've got 5 minutes. One piece of advice from you to organizations asking what's next for their DEI strategy?
I'll start, but I think I said it already. Be humble. Accept that we don't have the wealth of knowledge. That was our starting position in 2019. That's where we are still now. That's why whenever we feel like we need help, then we seek out
Ask help.
partner organizations. We ask help.
Right.
We ask questions so that we can be better on DEIB.
Wonderful. Rhi?
For mine, it would be to challenge and target your search partners or recruiters to have percentages of diversity on their long lists.
All right. Amanda?
My advice would be to think about what money are you leaving on the table by not
Yes.
tapping into diversity or inclusive strategies, either with your customer base, your leadership team, your employees, because there's money in it.
Right. Thank you so much, Felix, Rhi, Amanda, for sharing your expertise with us. We learned so much, and hopefully, what's next for DEI? It's not just D, but going beyond the D and going into the E and the I. Thank you very much, everybody. And thank you, Kathy. Back to you.
Yes, indeed. I'm loving the alphabet soup there, nearly missing a beat on all the characters. And I'm also realizing Rizal Ballroom turns into a karaoke bar. After 5, I thought we'd hit overtime, but we're just on time, and I hope you've enjoyed that. I truly did. I have some takeaways here. It's really being more mindful about, number one, who's in the room, right? So that's one. And are they treated fairly? And are opportunities accessible to all? So I hope you've also learned as much as I have. We've gone through a lot, haven't we? Who stayed here since this morning? Yeah, my gosh, I don't think you've left your seats. And those canapes really worked out, didn't it? Kept us alive. All right, well, thank you so much for joining us. We're just ramping up into day 2. So we've done ESG, AI, we've done climate emergency, and tomorrow let's prepare to learn more about enterprise priorities for a resilient future, when we present experts who will be leading our engaging and enlightening discussions tomorrow. So let's be here right on the dot. We have more in store for day 2. I'm Kathy Yang. See you bright and early tomorrow. I'm told that's going to be at 9 a.m. So I'll see you guys and have a great evening ahead.
Thank you very much, Miss Kathy Yang. Ladies and gentlemen, a final reminder, please, to accomplish the survey form using our QR code on your tables. Respondents this afternoon will qualify for the chance to win exciting prizes on our raffle draw tomorrow. So thank you very much for your response, and thank you for being part of Day 1 of AFES 2025, Navigating Disruption, Enterprise Priorities for a Resilient Future. Good day, ladies and gentlemen.